One of our own students as the speaker, Swank, whose topic is the international climate change negotiations and the role of youth at those negotiations in the recent conference in Bali. It was a tough assignment, but somebody had to go there. Most of you probably know Zach, but I just want a brief introduction. He's a political science major here in our department, so we're particularly happy to have one of our students. Majoring in environmental politics. He's minoring in computer science. He's a member of the honors program. It says here he will graduate this May, which I think is a good thing, right? We hope. And sort of building on those kinds of experiences, then was able to come to us and say, I'd like to go to Bali, I'm part of this group, and we all actually, perhaps to his surprise, said yes, and we now get to hear the fruits of that. And we're actually delighted that Zach was able to do this, and as I say, that kind of leveraging of these steps of taking advantage of the opportunities that are available and extending yourself is something that we all like to see, and now we'd like to hear about it.
This is the UN Climate Change Conference in Bali. It happened last December. It was a 2-week conference. And why am I here today? I want to tell you about it. I want to tell you what it was like to be there. I want to tell you what do we know about climate change very briefly. I want to explain what the conference was about, what it was like to be there. I want to explain what the role of youth was at this conference. I want to explain also what happened at the conference, what really went down. And I also want to explain what is next. And now I know probably some of you follow climate change issues, and some of you may even follow international policy, and some of you probably don't, any of those. So I think I have something to offer for everybody, and especially I want to give a feel of what it really goes on at these conferences and what it's like to be a part of it. So briefly, I'm just going to start off with what are some things we know about climate change? Well, the fourth, and when we hit 450 parts per billion, that's when we start to see the cataclysmic type of climate change effects that you hear about. The rising sea levels, the disappearing coastlines, the dramatic weather changes, the droughts, the hurricanes, those types of things start really happening, especially once we hit 450. And we're well on our way. And another interesting thing is that stabilization is possible. The fourth IPCC report estimated that for less than 3% of the global gross domestic product, we could establish stabilization of CO2 levels in our atmosphere. So this is not something that's insolvable. It is possible, and there are ways to work for it. We just need the policy. So, what about the policy? What was this conference about? This was the COP13, which is the 13th conference of the parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is the COP-MOP3, which is the 3rd conference of the parties, serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. It's SBI 27, which is the 27th session of the subsidiary body for implementation. And it's the SUBSTA 27, the 27th session for the subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice. And it's also AWG4, the resumed 4th session of the ad hoc working group on further commitments for Annex 1 parties under the Kyoto Protocol. So that's a lot. And it was a lot. That's one of the first things I saw when I got at the first day of the conference is you get these daily programs and they explain the whole thing. And it was the first time I'd seen all of that listed out together. And it was pretty sort of shaking because each of those different things could serve as its own conference for 2 weeks if people had the time for it. And it was just crammed into an incredibly intense 2 weeks. And I'm going to go over real quick what exactly the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is and how the Kyoto Protocol relates to the Bali roadmap, because I think a lot of people think that Bali is going to be the next Kyoto, and that's not true. The UNFCCC has universal membership. It was established in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, and 192 countries have ratified. And depending on which estimate you go by of how many countries there are in the world, that is either all of them or very close to it. Its purpose is to gather and share information on greenhouse gas emissions, national policies, and best practices, to launch national strategies for adjusting greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to expected impacts, including the provision of financial and technological support to developing countries, as well as to cooperate in preparing for adaptation to the effects of climate change. So that's what the UNFCCC is. It's the United Nations body, and this is where the Kyoto Protocol came from. It came out of this body. Now, like I said, Bali is not the next Kyoto. Kyoto is the international agreement on climate change that was came together in 1997. It was signed, and it runs out in 2012. For the developed countries that signed it, it's a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 5% from 1990 levels. For the developing countries, there's no binding commitment. It's just an agreement that they are going to work on this. Bali is, like I said, is not the next Kyoto. It's a roadmap for creating the next Kyoto. So when Kyoto runs out in 2012, the process that is started in Bali will hopefully be the new framework that steps in and takes its place. And they're looking at targets where Kyoto is much shorter, a shorter time frame. In the Bali roadmap, they're looking at targets for 2020 and 2050, which is a much longer time. In this picture here, they had a birthday party for Kyoto at the conference because it turned 10 years old while the conference was going on. It was a massive cake. So what was it like to be at this conference? Well, there were 10,000 participants, definitely the biggest single thing I've been a part of. From 180 countries, not every country that was a part of the UNFCCC was represented there. There were multiple pre-conferences throughout the year. They do these COP conferences every year. This is why this is the 13th one. And it was just absolutely massive. You can see I have highlighted here the two conference centers that they have, that they were split between, and you could actually have free bikes you could ride between them, or you could take a taxi. But it was pretty funny to see official party delegates riding these yellow free bikes between the conference centers and sweating because it was so hot. But it was, like I said before, it was intense. So this is the daily program, as I said before. And you pick this up in the morning, and it has all of the day's events. And this is, again, one daily program. It's 32 pages. That's just what was going on in one day. So it's clearly not possible to follow everything. And there was also, the conference was split sort of, the upper conference center was where the negotiations happened, and the lower one was where they held the side events. They had about 20 side events per day. And this is the booklet of side events for the 2 weeks. You can see it's fairly small print, and this is about 60 pages long. So, like, just the amount of information that was put forth, and it was just not possible to follow. They had the capacity to have 12 separate negotiations going on at the same time. And how that would work is they have, like I said earlier, they have the 4 different purposes for this meeting. There's the COP13, the COP3, the SBI 27, and SUSTA 27, 5 I guess, as well as the AWG 4. And so they're all sort of going on concurrently. So, it's just not possible to follow everything. I can't get that across because it was something that I tried to do even though I was warned against it, and you end up not being aware of anything that's going on because you can't catch enough of something to even know what's going on, because it happens at such a level due to the pre-conferences that all of the people who are engaging, the active participants in this conference, have been working on this stuff continuously all year, whereas the people coming in just for this conference, like my group, has not necessarily been doing that. There's a great quote from one of the official US delegates that says that it's sort of like the 7th level of hell. Beautiful weather, right on the beach in Bali, but all I do is work and sleep. I'm not even going to get a tan. And that is pretty much true, especially for them. They were very weary. Most of the official delegates were quite weary by the time it was over. I didn't work that hard. I took some breaks and enjoyed the beach, but still worked pretty hard.